Our next speaker is Chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, which is responsible for authorization and oversight of the VA, the second largest department in the federal government, with more than 300,000 employees and a budget of more than $119 billion. Since winning a special election for his Florida congressional seat in 2001, he quickly established himself as a strong advocate for veterans, supporting positive changes to concurrent receipt and requirements for greater data sharing between military and veterans clinics. He is also a strong supporter of the Defense Department and the global war on terrorism. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable Representative Jeff Miller.
Thank you very much, Commander Foster. It is an honor for me to be here, and Rita, it was a pleasure to spend some time with you last night at dinner. I enjoyed it, enjoyed the nitty-gritty dirt band, all of the entertainment, and Carleen Ashworth, thank you for your service to the American Legion Auxiliary. It is a group that I know the Legion depends on a lot. And to Secretary Shinseki, thank you for your leadership over the last 2.5 years. It's been an honor to work with you, and it's an honor to call you a friend. And I'm honored to be here amongst you for the 93rd Annual Convention of the American Legion, and I appreciate the invitation, and thank you so much for the warm welcome this morning. 2 weeks ago, 2 days after one of our Chinook helicopters had been shot down in Afghanistan, I stood on the tarmac at Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan for a battlefield memorial. And I witnessed what is perhaps one of the most solemn ceremonies in the military. It was a ramp ceremony. 40 souls were honored that night. All died fighting a hero's fight. I stood shoulder to shoulder with members of our armed forces to pay our final respects to the soldiers, the Navy SEALs, and the airmen as they prepared for their final journey home. We stood united in our grief, in our pain, and our anger over such a horrific loss of life. As we watched, I reflected on one truth we must always remember: that these heroes died for a nation they loved, doing a job that they loved, knowing that their sacrifice would advance the cause of liberty. None of us should ever lose sight of that dedication to duty and to country. Later that night, our military, with infinite resolve, continued the mission on behalf of their fallen comrades. This is what they do, day in and day out, year in and year out, as servicemen and women have done since those early days in Lexington and Concord. Our military and you, our veterans, are truly America's heroes. As we honor and remember each and every life that we have lost, we recommit ourselves in shared gratitude to serve those who have served us. It's impossible to put a price tag on freedom, but we all know the cost of war is all too apparent. Our men and women return home, some carrying with them the lasting effects of war, wounds that are both visible and invisible. Some return having difficulty adjusting to civilian life. Some come back and cannot find employment in today's tough economic climate. But just as on the battlefield, these men and women continue to put others before themselves to ensure lives are made better and that the ideals that they fought for in lands far away are still cherished here at home. It is that simple and often forgotten concept which is at the heart of the American Legion. It is what you, its members, stand for, and more important, what you fight for on behalf of your fellow veterans. And thankfully, America realized long ago that those who have worn the cloth of our nation are owed not only a debt of gratitude, but tools to help support them when they return. After each war and conflict, we reevaluate the programs and services that are offered by VA to ensure that they're not only meeting the needs of today's veterans, but that we are keeping the promise for past and future generations of veterans, a promise that has not always been kept. Today we find ourselves in a new era. Washington has a spending problem. It's not something that happened overnight. It's not news, and it doesn't surprise anybody. We need to cut up the credit cards and put America back on the path to fiscal sanity. This summer, there has been much debate on just how to accomplish that. And we've taken the first step, the difficult step, I believe, toward fiscal responsibility. Elected representatives all across this country need to recommit themselves to the job that we were elected to do. Those of us that are in Washington need to recommit ourselves to the job that we were elected to do, and that is to serve the American people. And that's exactly the message that I and my colleagues intend to bring back to the Capitol when we return next week. Now look, our Constitution is pretty clear. It's pretty clear on how we can tax and what we're supposed to be spending our money on. And again, this is not a new revelation. First and foremost, the Constitution provides for spending for the common defense and providing for the welfare of our citizens. Funding for American veteran programs, I believe, is a critical element to the common defense of this nation, and I believe you will see that reflected in the spending priorities in this Congress. But while we tighten our belts, let us not remember that we are still engaged in 2 wars and that we are in conflicts around the globe. Now, in the Budget Control Act of 2011, veteran benefits and services were not affected. Every veteran should still be receiving their check, and VA hospitals are operating as normal. But the new Select Committee that has already begun its work will have to trim a minimum of $1.2 trillion out of our budget, and we are out of options. But let me again state very clearly, funding for our military and our veterans is and will remain one of this nation's highest priorities. This is a joint select committee established for a particular purpose for a particular amount of time. And the Deficit Reduction Committee really is similar in structure to the Intelligence Committee that I serve on, or a conference committee, which is actually a temporary committee of members of the House and the Senate that are brought together to reconcile differences in legislation that has passed both chambers. And while this committee has received more press than probably any other select committee, it has no special powers that any other select committee has. In fact, the Joint Committee is comprised of 12 members of Congress, all members of Congress, both in the House and the Senate, and yes, the American people will still have an opportunity to play a role in the communities and that committee's process. All recommendations from the committee will have to pass both the House and the Senate and be signed by the President before becoming law. Now, coming to an agreement is not going to be easy. You're going to hear a lot of rhetoric from the media and from other special interest groups. But as chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, again, I promise to you that I will not only fight for America's veterans, but that I will stand steadfast in assuring that America's veterans are not used as political pawns in this process. And we intend to be proactive, keeping our veterans informed with the facts in the coming months, and will provide information on the progress of the Select Committee as it goes about its work. But just as important as getting our fiscal house in order is putting our America veterans back to work. Every veteran in every state across this country deserves better than to stand in unemployment lines. To that end, I have pledged to help reduce unemployment in our veteran communities by half, lowering the unemployment in the next 2 years, a rate we haven't seen since 2007. To do this, I've introduced a comprehensive veterans job legislation bill, actually back in July, and it's called the Veterans Opportunity to Work Act of 2011, or the VOW Act for short. Now, the VOW Act will ensure that we have the most trained, the most skilled workforce since the Second World War. Our soldiers, our Marines, our sailors, our airmen, and our Coast Guard returning from Afghanistan and Iraq face higher unemployment than the national average, while our older veterans, who make up 2/3 of the unemployed veteran community, are faced with a changing job market. In total, nearly 1 million veterans are out of work, and I'm sure that you'll agree with me that that number is unacceptable. Now, our committee has focused on this issue for much of this year, and I'd like to commend the President for joining us in this fight in making veteran employment a priority. The VOW Act has 5 pillars. First, we must enhance the Transition Assistance Program, which provides career counseling. TAP will be mandatory for all separating service members, and we will also make sure that it is meeting the needs of our veterans for the 21st century. Second, we all know that education is one of the keys to success. Right now, 48% of veterans using the Montgomery and post-9/11 GI Bill benefits are enrolled in 4-year colleges and universities. But we need to make sure that our Vietnam, our Cold War, and Persian Gulf era veterans also have opportunities to advance in the workplace. Therefore, under the VOW Act, up to 100,000 veterans of past eras can receive up to 1 year of Montgomery GI Bill benefits to retrain for careers in this new and ever-changing marketplace. Third, when members of the National Guard and Reserve are called to duty, their employer must keep their position open until they return and must not discriminate against them based on their Guard and their Reserve status. Too often, this has not been the case. So we will strengthen the protections provided by the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act, USERRA. We must be willing to defend veterans' rights even when others are unwilling to do so. Fourth, despite America's military having the best trained professionals in the world, the inability to be credentialed or licensed in their equivalent civilian field when they return home prevents these men and women from obtaining meaningful and gainful employment in their area of expertise. Some of these professions include medics, truck drivers, and aircraft technicians, to name a few. Our states hold the key to breaking down this barrier. I've been working with several governors and governors' associations as well as the Department of Labor to create uniform standards to ease this transition from active duty to civilian life. A combat medic who has seen the worst of war in Iraq or Afghanistan is surely qualified to be an EMT here at home. And lastly, I've introduced a bill providing meaningful tax incentives for small businesses that hire unemployed veterans, which will not only provide capital for the business which spurs growth, but also protects the veteran from being a mere tax break hire, a trick that we often see. And as important as its other features, the VOW Act does not increase the deficit one penny. I'd like to thank the Legion for their support of this legislation. Many of these proposals were supported by the American Legion's National Economic Division, and we would not be where we are today without having their help. But as you know, and as I know, and as the President knows, the government's role is not to create jobs. But what the government can do is create the right environment for the job market itself to flourish. And we do this by reducing the burdens of overreaching regulations that encumber America's small businesses, the engine of our economy. In other words, your government needs to get the hell out of the way of the economy, get the boot off the back of small businesses, and let the engine roar. Look, the time to talk is over. We've got to act, and we've got to do it quickly. I encourage each of you to take an opportunity to read the bill available on our committee's website at veterans.house.gov. And let your elected officials back home know what you think. And I look forward to the President signing the VOW Act into law as soon as possible. And while we get our veterans back to work, we cannot and we must not forget those who are suffering with the invisible wounds of war, post-traumatic stress, and traumatic brain injury. These can be some of the hardest wounds to treat. But we can, and we will, help these men and women get on a path to recovery. That was and still is the mission of the VA, to heal our veterans and provide them with the support necessary to lead full and productive lives. Now, today we face a choice. Either we take action to address the deficiencies in the current system, which many opt out of before even receiving treatment, or we maintain the status quo. The status quo, with a rising suicide rate, is not an option. It is unacceptable to me. This summer, a veteran of the Marine Corps testified before the full committee. He told us that he took the money from VA that he was receiving for PTS and its treatment and spent it on alcohol and other vices. It was not until this young man hit absolute rock bottom that he reached out to somebody for help. But instead of going to the VA, he turned to a private organization right here in Minnesota. And in 15 months, he had his life back. He courageously fought his demons and came back a stronger Marine. We've got to find a way to reach these men and women and provide them with the support that they need. We need to transform the culture of VA so that all veterans feel welcome. Again, it's not an easy task, but I believe it can and it must be done. It is incumbent upon all of us to reach out to those who are in pain. And we've also got to help them get as well as possible and to stop just masking the symptoms with drugs. Each of us has the ability to help, especially in our own communities. Legislation is about partnerships. The American Legion's Washington team is one of the finest. You should be very proud of the work that they do on your behalf in the nation's capital. Next month, we will welcome the Legion to Washington for its annual legislative hearing before the House and the Senate Veteran Affairs Committees. And this year, our committee intends to continue its aggressive oversight of VA to ensure that taxpayer dollars are not only being spent wisely, but being spent on veterans' needs, not on bureaucracy. We must also turn the corner on the shameful disability compensation claims backlog, and I heard Secretary Shinseki talking about that. We have heard for too many years, too many promises, and this Congress will turn the corner and make VA accountable to ensure accuracy for the first time a claim is submitted. We also want to hear from veterans just like you all over this country, from they and their families, to help us find solutions to problems within the system. Therefore, we want to hear from each of you, whether it's visiting our offices personally, calling us on the phone, sending us an email, or reaching out to us on Facebook. These issues are not partisan issues. They are veteran issues, and that's exactly the way that it should be. A quote from General Omar Bradley, former VA Secretary, stated quite bluntly in 1947, "We are dealing with veterans, not procedures, with their problems, not ours." I promise to each one of you here today, I will not let bureaucracy, red tape, or political brinkmanship stand in the way of caring for America's veterans during my tenure as chairman. You are my priority. This country's commitment to our veterans will never waver, and nor will mine. I applaud each of you and your families for your service to our country and to the American Legion. I thank you for the invitation. God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.